Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the GED Report. I'm G.
And I am D.
And we are coming to you tonight with heavy hearts. There is widespread violence in the Capitol. The Capitol was stormed today by a group of Trump supporters and insurrectionists. One person was killed. Half a dozen or more were injured and taken to local hospitals. The hospitals aren't releasing any names, so we don't know much about the victims. The voting to certify the election has recommenced, and there's some sentiment that once the Arizona protest has been dealt with, that there won't be any more protests by the Republicans, and Joe Biden will be certified as the winner of the 2020 election. So D, tell me what you think about today's event.
Well, you already said it's a sad day in our history. This is only the second time that our nation's capital has been stormed in this way, and the first time being from an outside force, which was in the War of 1812 when the British burned the White House and stormed the U.S. Capitol.
Yeah. Or Cory Booker put it, it's the second time that mobs beholden to a single sovereign have stormed the Capitol.
I'll go ahead and let you make that point.
Yeah, so in 1812, they were supporting the King of England, and in 2021, they're supporting their would-be king, Donald Trump.
Absolutely, yeah, that's what I was getting at, but the G-Man was ready for me. No, it's a sad day. This is not the way that democracy is supposed to be conducted, and it's not supposed to be you don't get your way, you storm a Capitol. I've been involved in protests before where we marched, and the whole point of a protest was march, hear a speaker, make your presence known, and then go home.
Right.
It wasn't to storm and take over anything. It wasn't to go in and rip stuff up in Nancy Pelosi's office, tear her nameplate off her door and take it as a souvenir. It wasn't to go sit at her desk and put your feet up on her desk and take U.S. property from her office. It wasn't to go climb on the rostrum or the dais in the Senate chamber or the House chamber or hang over the ledge. And it's supposed to be a sacred place. I forget which senator it was. It might have been Dick Durbin that was talking earlier. And he talked about the fact that when Lincoln took the train ride as president, they were building the dome at the time.
Yeah.
And he was advised by his presidential team to stop the construction on the dome of the Capitol because we were at war and we didn't have the money. And he said, no, the construction must go on because it needs to be a beacon to our citizenry once this war is over, that our democracy lives, our republic thrives. Yeah. And for it to be desecrated in this way by people carrying flags that are dedicated to a despot, and that's the nicest thing I can call him tonight, for somebody who incited this insurrection and this terrorism, who told them storm the Capitol, told them, we're not giving up ever. We're not going to give up the White House. And then for me, probably the hardest picture that I saw today was the guy walking through with a smug smile on his face, carrying the Confederate flag.
Yeah.
In our Capitol, Confederate flag.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't get much more treasonous than that. This is supposed to be the crowd that backs the blue and supports law enforcement. And you saw him bum rushing the Capitol Police. You saw him shoving some of the Capitol Police. But that kind of leads me to a topic I wanted to ask you about. How do you think, what's going to be the reaction when we start digging into this and we really start to evaluate the Capitol Police's performance? And I don't mean the people inside the building, because those people were laid siege to in a lot of cases. But I'm talking about outside. Was there not a plan to stop this?
Well, I think there was a plan. I don't think they had enough people to execute it.
Well, and that may be the case, but um, you know, I don't want to make light of what happened today, but what if these folks had been more organized? What if they had been a terrorist cell from another country? I'm
Right.
not going to name. I'm not going to name organizations because I don't want to give those organizations promotion. But what if that had been the case? Would they have been able to stroll so easily right into our nation's capital? I mean, I told you this story earlier, but the last time, or one of the last times we were in DC, which was many years ago, we went to visit the Capitol to take a tour, and we had to go through so much security. My wife had a small bottle of perfume she had to give up because it was deemed, it was a liquid, and they weren't allowing any liquids in. Nobody screened any of these folks. They stormed it. They tipped over the barriers. They broke out windows. I mean, it was one of the most ugly scenes I've ever seen in our country's history, and it'll go down as a day that lives in infamy.
Yeah. Yes, it will. So let me ask you this. How do you think we got to this point?
Well, I think we got to this point by people turning their backs for the last 5 odd years, including the campaign, and even further than that. You go back to the way the Republican Party has, as a whole, embraced this type of mentality. Think back to the Tea Party. Remember all those folks, and they're screaming and showing up at town halls, and you know, the Republican Party has a lot to blame for what happened today, because over the last, probably 20 years, they've accepted it. They've accepted this type of behavior.
Yeah.
Instead of saying you can protest, but you're not one of my supporters if you protest this way. You're not going to yell in people's face. You're not going to shout people down. You're not going to just stomp around and say, unless you get your way. And I really feel like the Republican Party, their win at all cost mentality, where they don't accept losing.
Yeah.
You know, when Barack Obama won the presidency in 2008, it was determined very early he could put anything forward he wanted. It could be a Republican idea, and because it was him, they were going to block it.
Well, I remember Mitch McConnell saying, "Our job is to ensure he's a one-term president."
Right.
That was
Right.
pretty uncivil.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so I feel like it goes back that far.
Right.
You think about McCain. You think about that campaign where he chose Sarah Palin, and the rhetoric around her, and the way she used to talk about, Barack Obama palling around with terrorists, and all that, just that kind of language. I think that's my big takeaway, is that language matters.
Yeah.
And the words that our leaders say matter. And I read a couple different things from some senators today that said, and a member of the House as well, that said behind closed doors, they hadn't found one person who was raising objections today that said they truly believed there was anything wrong with the election. And not one of them said this is going to overturn it. They were just doing it out of pure political reasons.
Yep. They all want that Trump base in 2024, and they think that by standing with him now, that they'll be able to curry favor with him in 4 years. So let's jump over to Senator Josh Hawley, and tell me what you know about his role in all this, and what actions he took today.
Yeah, he's kind of been cited as the father of this movement, because of the standpoint that he was the first senator that came out and said he was going to sign on to the objections. And that caused the 11 other senators to bum rush the door to try to get on it as well, because of all their ambitions for the presidential election in 2024. But Hawley's been an opportunist his whole career. He was, and the sad thing is, this guy was a clerk for Chief Justice Roberts.
Yeah.
And he knows better. He knows the law inside and out. He knows that there was no election fraud. He knows that the way the states conducted their elections, they had every right to do it. He knows the Supreme Court considered those rulings, yet he did nothing. You know, when one of Donald Trump's personal lawyers, Lynn Wood, spoke up and accused Chief Roberts of being with Jeffrey Epstein and being a child molester and a pedophile, Josh Hawley didn't speak up in defense of his old boss because it might cost him politically. When he was I believe it was Attorney General in the state of Missouri, when he ran for that office, people said, this guy has higher aspirations. And he said, I promise you, I will not use this office to run for anything bigger. I'm going to serve my full 4-year term. 2 years into his term, he ran for U.S. Senate, ran against Claire McCaskill, beat her. And then now he's blatantly, obviously, running for president. So this guy really caused a lot of this to happen today and has a lot of blood on his hands. I wanted to read just a little excerpt from the Kansas City Star, which is his hometown paper. And this is what they had to say in an op-ed they released tonight. It's called Assault on Democracy. Senator Josh Hawley has blood on his hands in Capitol coup attempt. No one other than President Donald Trump himself is more responsible for Wednesday's coup attempt at the U.S. Capitol than one Joshua David Hawley, the 41-year-old junior senator from Missouri, who put out a fundraising appeal while the siege was underway. This Senator Hawley is what law-breaking and destruction looks like. This is what mobs do. This is not a protest, but a riot. One woman was shot and killed, and the Washington Post reported while lawmakers were sheltering in place. No longer can it be asked, as George Will did recently to Hawley, has there ever been such a high ratio of ambition to accomplishment? Hawley's action in the last week had such impact that he deserves an impressive share of the blame for the blood that's been shed. I don't think it can be said any better than that. This guy sent out a fundraising email during the siege this afternoon.
Yeah, that's crazy.
There's calls all over the place for him to resign, and I want to go on the record and say I think he should resign.
Yeah, I do too. Let's switch over and talk a little bit about the junior senator from my home state, Ted Cruz. What was his role in all this?
Well, he was like a kid when the ice cream truck shows up in the neighborhood. As soon as Josh Hawley announced that he was going to do this, he jumped on board too, and he was actually the senator who signed on to the Arizona objection, which is what we're debating now,
right?
That we're back in session. He's just a blatant political opportunist who has, I mean, I don't say this lightly about anybody, but Ted Cruz has no soul. I mean, the man is devoid of a soul. If you're going to campaign for and support, it's one thing if you support the nominee of your party after a bloody primary that you lose, because that's kind of expected for you to do that.
Yeah.
But when that particular nominee accused your father of being involved in the John F. Kennedy assassination in Dallas, says your wife is ugly, insults her based on some of the mental illness problems that his wife has had. I mean, and then you lick his boots for 4 years.
There's no way to do that.
I mean, this guy is, I mean, there's no election worth winning that is worth the cost that these people are paying.
Yeah. So let's talk about.
Well, I will say this too. I will say before you jump on, former Housing and Urban Development Secretary Joaquin Phoenix, Joaquin Phoenix. Joaquin Castro, and I said that wrong too. Julian is the former Housing and Urban Secretary. They're twins. Joaquin Castro, the representative from San Antonio, has issued a formal call for Cruz to resign tonight too.
Yeah, as well they should. So how do you think the Republican Party fares going forward after today? Because clearly the blame for this lies squarely on the shoulders of the Republican Party.
Well, it's going to be a bumpy night. I'm going to tell you that right now, because they're going to stay in session. I think the Republicans are going to try to gavel this thing out as quick as they can. I almost think that just for shits and giggles, I almost think the Democrats ought to object to at least one other state so they get 2 more hours to talk about this.
Right.
Because I like you said with what Rand Paul said, I think the Republicans are going to want to get out of this as quick as they can, because today, I don't think obviously it was one of the darkest days in our history, but politically, this is what, Mitch McConnell didn't know they were going to riot the Capitol, as far as I know. But when he said this is a divisive vote that will do no good, it was his legislative experience talking.
Yeah.
And you had these young upstarts, the Ted Cruzes and the Josh Hawleys. Oh, I know more than Mitch McConnell does. And as much as I don't like Moscow Mitch, you can't argue with the success he's had on his side of the aisle and the way he's commandeered the legislative schedule and legislative agenda. But we're going to talk about something else in a minute that happened yesterday and kind of concluded today. But I don't know that this is something that they can really recover from, because for the rest of these politicians' careers, they're going to be known as the politicians who fomented this insurrection.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And hopefully it makes it hard for them to get elected again in their home state.
Well, and Kelly Loeffler, again, we're going to talk about her in a second, foreshadowing a little bit there. But I mean, when she went to the floor tonight, she completely changed courses and said, I planned to come to the floor this morning and support this. Based on the violence that's happened today, I can no longer support it.
Yeah.
And she had no reason. She could have went full Trump.
Yeah. Well, I think they're seeing their fearless leader isn't the panacea they thought he would be. I think they are finally seeing what the rest of us saw, that he's a tyrant, a bully. He's got no sense of shame. He's got no common sense when it comes to looking at the numbers and the election of 2020.
Well, tyrants are okay as long as they get their way, right?
Not in America.
I mean, I'm talking about they're okay. They're okay mentally with themselves as long as they get their way.
Yeah.
If he gets everything he wants, he's okay. This is the first big thing. I mean, there's been some legislative things, but what does he care about those? He doesn't really care about legislation.
Yeah.
He doesn't care about, I can't name, I couldn't name one single thing that he honestly cared about as far as a legislative agenda, other than maybe the tax cut that he thought would help him financially. He cares about himself.
Yeah.
And so when I mentioned bumpy night, I want to talk about a couple other topics, and then we can talk about what happened yesterday. But first of all, we're getting word now that there could be massive resignations tonight as a protest to Trump. The First Lady's chief of staff, who used to be the communications director, has resigned.
Yeah.
I just heard whispers on another feed that I got coming in that Mitch McConnell's wife, Elaine Chao, Secretary of Transportation, is going to be resigning probably tonight. And so we may be seeing a lot of resignations, and some of that could be from the fact that CBS News is reporting that there's at least whispers of the cabinet trying to meet and talk about the 25th Amendment.
Well, I think anything you can do to get this guy out of there, and then I think they should follow that up with the Capitol Police arresting him for inciting insurrection, because clearly he did. Even in that little speech where he asked him to go home, he basically reiterated that the election was stolen, and it's a sad day in America, and blah blah blah. I mean, he could have taken the high road and said, I realize now the election was fair and square. Joe Biden was the winner. The American people have spoken, and I'll see you in 4 years. He could have taken that road, but he didn't. He just clings to this misguided and disproved conspiracy theory that the election was stolen somehow.
Well, today's the fruit of that.
Yeah.
Today's the fruit of it, and forever, when you think Donald Trump, you'll think this.
Yeah.
So
I've
been teasing it, but let's talk about the final Senate races yesterday in Georgia.
Absolutely. So Georgia, which went for Biden in the general, and the two Democrat candidates John Ossoff, who, by the way, had one of the best slogans I think I've ever heard. His slogan was "Vote your ass off,"
Right.
and Reverend Raphael Warnock up against appointed Senator Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, who is the brother of Sonny Perdue, who was the former agricultural commissioner. Anyway, in the general, the two Democrats scraped together enough votes to deny either one of the Republicans a 50% plus one majority. So it went to a runoff. It was very contentious. A lot of money was spent. I heard over $100 million just on the Warnock race. Trump went down to campaign, and so did Biden and Harris, and so did Pence. So they were bringing out the heavy hitters. And the election was concluded this morning, right?
Yep.
Why don't you tell us how that turned out?
Well, we overnight they were pretty close to declaring Warnock the winner. He won hands down very easily by about 3 percentage points. I think is where he ended up, 2.5, 3 percentage points. And then Ossoff was called officially this afternoon, but Ossoff ended up pulling out. The Democrats won both seats. It was a twofer, just like I called it going to be a twofer.
Yep.
On the podcast many times. And a couple of things about it. I'm pretty sure Ossoff is the first Jewish senator from the state of Georgia. Warnock is definitely the first African-American senator from the state of Georgia. So really historic victories there. Couple other things.
Warnock was the first Democrat elected since the Civil War.
Democrat? No, that's not true.
The first Black Democrat.
Oh, Black Democrat. Okay. No, Carol Moseley Braun was a senator from Illinois, and then you had
from the South.
Oh, from the South. Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, I go for that. But there's only been like 10 African American U.S. senators in the history of our country.
Yeah.
And so, a couple things about it. Number one, obviously, big play is the fact that this now gives the Democrats the majority in the U.S. Senate.
Absolutely.
And so you've got, it'll be 50-50, but that goes to the president of the Senate, which will be Vice President Kamala Harris. And so now it's 51-50 for all intents and purposes. And people say, wow, that's razor thin. And, oh, it's going to be tough to govern. But you know what that does? That means every committee chairman is now going to be appointed by Chuck Schumer and the Democrats. That means those committee chairs get to set what and when things are debated. The majority leader gets to determine what comes to the floor. So Joe Biden's going to have a lot easier time getting his nominations confirmed. If we're on a judicial watch, I'm going to predict Justice Breyer is probably going to retire at the end of this Supreme Court justice term.
Right.
And so that'll be one appointment that he'll be able to get through. And then furthermore, you're going to probably have, we're going to be watching, Clarence Thomas is getting up there. He's the longest serving justice now, but he's getting up there in age. And so you hate to say it, but there's a death watch every time there's a new president on the Supreme Court. And so obviously huge for Joe Biden, huge implications for getting things done in DC with the Democrats having both the House and the Senate. And there's some opportunities there too for some common sense things too that Mitch McConnell was holding up to protect the right wing. I think you could see some things like criminal justice reform get passed with a pretty healthy bipartisan swath, because I think there's going to be some moderate Republicans that are going to want to support things like criminal justice reforms, infrastructure bills, things like that we can get done and really help our country. But I wanted to go back and just talk about one other topic related to this, and you may have a couple other things, but before it slips my mind, I think these races are another case of making sure the dollars that are spent are invested in the right way.
Yeah.
And here's my point. the Warnock race was $100 million. I think Ossoff race was close to that. Majority of the money was on the Republican side this time. So the Republicans heavily outspent them. They were under fundraising, the Republicans, but the Democrats were strategic in how they did it. And so it makes me think sometimes maybe we need to invest in get out the vote organizations rather than in campaigns. You know, it's like
Abrams did.
yeah, like Stacey Abrams with her Fair Fight organization. There's Natasha Brown with Black Voters Matter, her organization that worked on getting African American voters out. Stacey's organization worked on people understanding the deadlines, the rules, when they could and couldn't vote. And so I think going forward, that's my lesson to take away is it's one thing to have money at the candidate level, but you can only buy so many commercials.
Yep.
You can only spend so much media if you don't have a good ground game. And the ground game doesn't necessarily have to be from the candidate. It could be from some of these other organizations.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to add before I forget about it is Facebook and Twitter have already moved to ban Donald Trump indefinitely. So
Yeah.
how that plays out.
Yeah, he's becoming more unhinged by the hour, and I think everybody probably should be pretty afraid of that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's been a crazy couple of days, crazy 24 hours. Who knows what the next 24 hours will hold? But what I hope it holds is I hope that we end up with a quick confirmation of the fairly decided election that we've had.
Yeah.
So that will stabilize our country. And then I hope there's either a resignation or a removal soon, because I honestly, and everybody talks about this, and I know people say it all the time about different presidents, but it does not make me feel good with him having the nuclear codes.
Yeah. Or just access to the military where he can order them anywhere in the world. I mean,
yeah, we didn't touch on that before we wrap, but it was an interesting development tonight, and I can't get I've tried to dig in on it, but initially when this happened, there were calls for the DC National Guard to be called out. The mayor of Washington, DC cannot do that. It has to be the president of the United States because it's federal territory.
right.
And so initially the DC National Guard was not called out, and finally they were after the Virginia governor answered the call and sent Virginia Marshals and Virginia National Guard. But it was found out later that the acting Secretary of Defense, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, had consulted with Vice President Pence, and Vice President Pence had given the order for the DC National Guard because Trump had refused, I think, 3 times to have the National Guard because he said he didn't want to be seen as unleashing the National Guard on his supporters.
Right.
And so
Don't worry about the safety of the elected officials.
or the Capitol building itself, while these people are defiling it. But my question is just the constitutionality of that.
Yeah. So what you're saying is Pence doesn't have the authority. And
Right.
so I guess basically the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the other military officials basically said to heck with this. We're going to go get approval from somebody, and that somebody's going to be Mike Pence. And Pence stepped up. So this is going to be, there are going to be books and books and books written about this day and all the things that happened. And it's not going to be pretty. We told you back in October when we were starting to ramp up towards the election that it was going to be a long and very bumpy ride. And man, I hate to say it, but boy, were we correct.
Yeah, and I thought it would be bumpy, but I didn't know it was going to be this bumpy.
Yeah. Well, and I'm not sure it's over. I mean, we've got an inauguration to secure, and I could see protesters trying to disrupt that. I mean, it's going to stay crazy for a bit.
Yeah. Well, we just have to hope for the best and be vigilant. And it's time for people of goodwill to stand up.
Yeah.
And if you supported Donald Trump and his policies, I can understand some of that, as far as maybe like the tax cuts or things like that, maybe. But it's time. It's okay to say that you didn't think he would be this bad, even though people like G-Man and I were saying it for 4 years. It's time for people to stand up, and it's time for our legislators to stand up. It's time for our cabinet to stand up. And while it's only 2 weeks away, there's a lot of things that can happen in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And so I pray for our country tonight, and that we can make it through these 2 weeks safely and peacefully.
Amen to that. And
All right.
with that, we'll call it a night.
Absolutely. Everybody be safe out there, and be sure and wear a mask if you go out. And still got, that's the other thing. Nobody's even talking about COVID, but the COVID deaths are going up in a lot of places. COVID cases are going up. I know in Los Angeles, they're actually instructing EMTs in some of the areas that if they don't think someone's going to live, don't bring them to the hospital.
Yeah, which is really bad.
It's sad, and it's a lot of scary and a lot of pressure to put on an EMT to make that decision.
Yeah.
So let's be vigilant. Let's make it through this next couple of weeks, and then hopefully we'll have, I know we'll have a lot of big changes on the horizon, and hopefully a national vaccine policy at that point. So everybody stay safe, and we'll see you real soon.
Good night, everybody.